Welcome to the History Center. Janelle, can you believe that another cemetery walk is behind us? 21 years.
21 years. It just seemed like a little while ago. We were talking about what can we do as something new and relevant as a fundraiser.
Seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
Not really.
I'm Mark Peterson, the interim director of the Winona County Historical Society. I'm with Janelle Moore, who's our chair of our cemetery walk.
So welcome to our video of the cemetery walk, number 21. We had to start all over this year. We have done it pretty much on one type of walk for 20 years, and this year we were all set to go again, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit. So we had to totally change course, start over, get a new forum for it, and new stories, and so that's what happened this year.
Well, it turned out very well. I can't believe how lucky we were with the weather.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, I like to think I took charge of the weather this year, but.
Well, you did a good job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But it's really a great event. It's a signature event for the Historical Society, and it's one of those fun educational events that is being held in what I personally believe is the most beautiful cemetery in all the Midwest.
Yes, maybe in all creation.
Well, I'll go for that.
Okay. When we first started out, we started telling individual stories, and then we kind of went to themes for a while. This year, we went back more to individual or just dual stories. Because of the pandemic, we wanted to allow people to space themselves, and so they could visit all the acts without having to be in a crowd with a guide. And our feedback from people was that they really loved this way of doing it. It gave them more chance to check out the cemetery and take their own pace. We had more stories. They were spread out into areas that we couldn't usually get to with a crowd. So it worked out really well.
You know, this is a fundraiser for the Historical
Right.
Society, and really one of our signature fundraising events for the year. And the Society's had a challenging year with the pandemic, and we hope people will enjoy the event, but also support the Society.
Right, and the best way to do that is to go to the website, www.WinonaHistory, is that right?
WinonaHistory.org.
Okay, perfect, okay. And you can donate online.
You can not only donate, but you can explore our sites and site and see all the other things that are going on here.
Right, and we really appreciate the support. It keeps this place going.
It has been a challenging year with the pandemic and being closed for several months, and
Yes.
loss of revenue from some of our events and programs this year, but
Yes.
learned a long time ago. The History Center, the Historical Society will survive because of all the people out there that really do care about their history.
There's huge community support for it. So I hope you do enjoy the next 15 sites of the cemetery walk, and hope you'll come back and join us again next year.
Hey folks, come on over here. You need to meet my lovely wife Rebecca. I'm William Dill. I was a wheat farmer to be exact, 200 acres. Anyway, a farmer back in my day was darn lucky to get a lovely lady like this one. Her father was even a sea captain. I don't know how she ended up marrying a man with a last name like Dill, you know, like Dill Pickle.
Oh, Bill, you're just being silly. It wasn't the pickle, it was the Dill. Besides, I must have liked you. We had 12 children. You know, you weren't just a farmer. You were a lumberman and a marshal and a sheriff for 3 terms.
Yeah, well, my wife, she just loved to entertain. I can't tell you, I don't know how she did the hospitality thing so well with all those kids and all, but she did. She loved to do it, and her people loved to come to her parties.
Well, Bill, you liked it too.
Well, sure, I didn't have to do any of the planning, any of the work. You know, who wouldn't? Yeah, I guess I kind of did like it.
Well, Bill was a good sheriff, too. He had a great reputation throughout the whole town. Did I tell you he was reelected for 3 terms?
I think you did mention that, dear, but, sheriffing wasn't as exciting as it might sound. Things like chasing after Mrs. Wallace's stolen cow.
I think she might be here somewhere today. You might get to see her.
The cow? Oh, no, Mrs. Wallace. Anyway, back to my story. The cow didn't care that it was stolen. It just wanted to get fed.
I told you he had a big heart. Why, sometimes he even gave the prisoners money to pay their own fines.
Well, sure, we made pretty good money, dear. $5,000 a year. That was almost unheard of in our day. And some of those poor devils didn't have 2 nickels to rub together.
Oh. So why don't you tell them about the time that you went over and got 40 men and went to Janesville, and the Republican paper here in Winona and the Chicago Times sent reporters with you.
That was pretty exciting. Yeah, we joined up with a posse, and we went after those outlaws who robbed the bank up in Northfield. I'm sure you've heard of them. It was the James Younger gang. It was Frank and Jesse James and the Younger brothers up from Missouri. There were 8 of them in all. Anyway, the robbery went bad and ended up in a shootout. 2 of the robbers got killed, 2 ended up badly injured, but the rest sadly got away.
Wow, everyone was frantic. There were killers on the loose.
Yeah, well, we joined posses from all over the state. James Stovall, who he's buried around here somewhere too. Anyway, he was with us. But in the end, Frank and Jesse still got away, those darn scoundrels. Wouldn't have lasted long if they ended up in my sights, that's for sure.
You mean you wouldn't have paid their fines, dear?
Sure, shooting I wouldn't have. I mean, they were terrorized the country for 10 years after the Civil War. There were wanted posters everywhere. They didn't deserve bail, and that's a fact.
Oh, my brave sheriff. Why didn't you tell the people what happened to the James boys?
And ruin the end of the story? No way. They'll have to check that out for themselves. You folks can read, can't you?
Well, I think there may be a library here in town. I think they can go there to find out what happened to them.
If not, we'll never know how it ends, I guess.
Well, thanks for visiting, and watch out for those James brothers.
Thanks now.
Hello. I just love having people around, especially young people. It gets so boring with all these old people. I'm sure you understand. I am Mrs. T.S. Quincy. I ended up here in the cemetery, but I actually did not spend many years of my poor, tragic life in Winona. I was orphaned as a child, and Eliza and Lodovick Van Anden kindly took me in. They are buried here with me. So I became known as Alice S. Van Anden. They never had any children of their own, but they loved me very much. In New York, my foster father ran a hotel. Eliza was a porter, and some of her siblings came to Minnesota in the 1850s and 1860s. Eliza and Lodovick decided to come too. They came to Winona in 1861, and then a year later moved to Mantorville, where Lodovick opened a mercantile store, still maintaining business interests here. The Porters and Van Andens were always going back and forth between Mantorville and Winona, visiting one another. I made numerous friends in both locations. I met Thomas Quincy in Mantorville, and our family friend, Mr. Royal Cone, offered him a position in his store. So Thomas moved to Winona. Thomas asked me to marry him, and my parents set about planning the wedding that every girl dreams about. And I was only 20 years old. My wedding, the highlight of my brief life. The nuptials were held on Wednesday, May 8th in 1878 in Mantorville. Several Winona folks made the 70-mile trip to see Thomas and I wed. You'd probably recognize some of their names. You know, Simpson, Lard, Morgan, and Cone. The Porters' aunts and uncles and cousins, they all stayed at the Hubble House, which is a popular Winona destination. You might have heard of it. Maybe. I don't know. At 7 p.m., the bridal party possessed to the congregation church. to a musical selection by an organ, a cornet, and a violin. Lodovick escorted me down the aisle to my betrothed. My dress. My exquisite dress. Why, it's silk, and the shade is referred to as café au lait. Mr. Cameraman, do you know what that means?
No clue.
I didn't think so. Why, it basically means cream. After the ceremony, Thomas and I left for the reception at my parents' house. The refreshments were bountiful. The gifts were elegant and such divine presents. Silver, laces, linens, bric-a-brac. What a marvelous evening. The very next day, Thomas and I left for Winona to make our home with my family, the Stouts. Lucinda was also a porter. We had such plans. We were ready for a home and a family of our own. But my health had always been delicate. Consumption, a lung disease, and I grew increasingly weaker. And Thomas was traveling so much. Eliza had come up from Mantorville to look after me. But, alas, I died. Just 6 months a bride. And what became of Thomas, the poor young widower? Well, he moved to Chicago and later remarried, so all those dreams we had, well, Florence got to live them out with my Thomas. And all those enchanting wedding gifts, I never got to use any one of them. I never served hot tea with a silver service. I never ladled the punch in a crystal bowl. I never got to lay the delicate lace tablecloth, When I think of that Florence using my pretty little things, why, it's just not fair. It's not fair. Well, I hope you fare better. Well, farewell.
Oh, Retta, I am so glad you're here. I know you will understand. I am just so angry.
Well, all right, Clea, dear. What bee's gotten in your bonnet this morning?
Well, I went for my morning constitutional this morning, and I found by the front gate an empty bottle. It once contained alcohol, that evil brew.
Oh, well,
I just know some young man went out last night and imbibed.
well, Clea, dear, I can see why you're so upset. But, you have to realize it's been over 125 years since we walked on this earth, well, in mortal bodies anyway. You have to know that things will have changed.
Well, I guess you're right. But they certainly have not changed for the better.
Oh, well, hello. Look, Clea, dear, we seem to have an audience. As you people have probably already surmised, Clea and I are from a very different era. I am Mrs. Eureta W. Wallace, and this is my dearest friend, Cleantha Peck Lewis.
How do? Actually, my name is Cleantha Peck Clark Lewis Lewis. Clark Lewis Lewis were from my 3 husbands.
Well, you must admit, Clea, dear, that 3 husbands does seem, well, a bit excessive.
Well, it's not like I planned it that way. It's not like when I was a young lady I thought, I think I shall have myself 3 husbands. Well, I was born in New York, and my father was a preacher, as were 2 of my husbands, the Lewis brothers. Well, I know. But Solomon Clark, well, Solomon was my first husband, and bless his heart, he passed away when I was 22. Well, you can't expect me to stay unmarried the rest of my life. I was only 22.
Well, yeah, knowing you, Clea, that doesn't surprise me a bit. Now, my William and I were born in Eastern Canada. We were married there in 1839, and we started our family. We moved here, we moved to Lenora in Fillmore County in 59, and then here to beautiful Winona in 1871. We lived on the south side of the lake. Our property was so wonderful that people would always stop by to water their horses on our property. We had a very good one. But then in 1871, William and our daughter Emma were going to town on business. William suddenly dropped the reins and fell back. Our daughter Emma, who was only 14 at the time, was very quick. She grabbed the reins and called for help. A very nice Mr. Gage came by, and he took William to his home, but it was much too late. William had passed. I was widowed at the age of 58, and I lived the last 14 years of my life all by myself.
Well, Benjamin Green Lewis, my second husband, we were married for 37 years. But when we met, we had been widowed. When we met in Michigan, and we wed there in Michigan. Now, he had 3 children, and together we had 3 children. Well, he was 24 years older than I was. But I still had him for 37 years of marriage, so that was good. Now, he was a preacher, a good Baptist preacher. And when he lived in Ohio, he ran a temperance tavern, he ran a store, and a church out of his home. Well, we lived in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And we came here to live in Winona because our son Wade lived here. And we were such good Baptists. And everywhere we went, we started new congregations.
Baptist, yes. Well, Clea, you may have been a Baptist, but at least you were a good supporter of the temperance movement. Now, my family were all good Methodists. There was absolutely no alcohol in our household. So, Clea, tell me, how did you come by your third husband? It was Benjamin's younger brother, I believe?
Why, yes. Well, Deacon Matthew Lewis was Benjamin's younger brother by several years. Well, he was living in California when his wife passed away. He came here for a visit, and we decided to make a go of it. And so we got married in 1882, the month of October. Well, we were on our way back to California, and we stopped in Omaha to visit my daughter, and there he died. We were only married for 6 months.
6 months. Well, that hardly even counts as a marriage, Clea.
Nope, and I lived the rest of my 10 years alone, by myself. Went to Omaha to my daughter's to visit. Died there.
Omaha again.
Omaha. They brought my body back here to be buried with my last 2 husbands. But did they bother to give me my own tombstone? No. They didn't even bother to etch my name on the back of one of their tombstones.
Well, I know, Clea. My William and I are buried here with other family members as well, but they didn't even bother to give us gravestones. Honestly, what more can we say?
Well, I would tell these fine people not to imbibe, but if you feel you must imbibe, please dispose of your bottles properly.
Well, Clea, I was going to say that. Once again, you always have to have the last word. You left me nothing to say except to wish these good people goodbye and thank you for coming to visit us.
And please don't imbibe.
Yeah, last word again.
Schönen Tag. I am Gustav Unger, and this is my dear wife for her 16 earthly years, Dora.
Yeah, I came to America as a teen with my family from Holstein, Germany. Even now, after all these years, we still seem to have an accent, do we not?
Yeah, well, I guess you can take the man out of Germany, but you can't take the German out of the man.
And that is what drew all your customers to your butcher shop. Your wonderful sausages, the Wiener Schnitzel.
I was born in Saxony in 1826, and at the age of 26, I sailed for America.
California was your destination?
Yeah, it took 3 months to get there.
Even so, the gold rush had begun 4 years before. Gustav thought he, too, could make his fortunes there.
Stayed there 4 years, I did, yeah. Then Winona beckoned me. I arrived here in 1856. I started a butcher shop on Main Avenue, or Main Street. Immigrants were arriving here from all over Europe. Germans, Poles, Italians, and they all wanted their traditional sausages.
Life was good, but you had nobody to share it with.
Yeah, but then I met my Dorothea here. Her stepfather ran a saloon. She consented to be my wife, and we were married in May of 1861. The Civil War had just begun. I operated Ungers Market, one of 3 butcher shops in Winona.
Yeah, then there was the fire of 1862. Here I was, so newly a Frau, and it could have been a Witwe, a widow. The fire leaped from the stovepipe to the bedstead nearby and caught fire. The whole block could have been lost.
Yeah, the help arrived soon, and the alarm sounded shortly. The worst of it was, most of the damage was from the broken windows and cutting through the roof to reach the fire.
Oh, at least then you were shot. Yes, here I had been so newly a Frau, and it could have been a Witwe, a widow.
Ah, but Liebste, it was just a small wound. A rogue bullet that went off in a gun from a fire, in the fire. The worst of it was that it wiped out all my meats, $500 worth. But I reopened. I sold fresh and smoked and dried meats for many years, of all kinds, for many years. Built what they called the Unger Block on Walnut Street.
We were not blessed with children of our own. But when my sister Charlotte died, her 2 boys, aged 6 and 8, came to live with us. We were able to travel to Europe, and we found that San Antonio was a very good destination for Gustav's health in the winter.
Yeah, all in all, it was a good life. We came to America for a better life, and we found it here in this community. I moved up here to Woodlawn in 1890, at age 64. Dorothea was 13 years younger than me and outlived me by over 3 decades.
Yeah, I died in 1925, at the age of 85. Do I ever regret being a butcher's wife? All those bloody aprons to wash? Oh, never. Gustav was a good man, and he made fine sausages too.
Oh, my Dora, my little Würstchen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Well, good afternoon on this glorious day that the Lord hath made. Welcome to my gravesite, Martha J. Thompson, born 1835, died 1926. Now, I've come to tell you about 2 causes. Women's suffrage, giving the right to vote to women, and temperance, the prohibition of alcohol, the devil's drink. And to think this is the 100th anniversary of resolving both of those causes. Now, let's face it, ladies, throughout history, we have been treated like mere possessions of men. First we're owned by our fathers, then we're owned by our husbands. We were denied the right to vote, and then we couldn't own property. We could not sign contracts, and we were discouraged from getting education and also from working outside the home. And if we did work outside the home, we earned half of what men did. And then when we got our wages, they went not to us, but to our menfolk. Now, add a little cheap and plentiful booze, consumed from morning to night, And those self-proclaimed self-proclaimed masters became monsters. Drunkenness ran rampant back in those days. It was, I think consumption of alcohol was 3 times higher than it is today. Now, who suffered from all of this, from this moral depravity? It was the women and the children and families. No wonder temperance and suffrage were so closely linked. Now, you may wonder where I got started. I was born in Michigan to a very strict, morality-based and teetotaling household. My mother, Fanny Adams, she's buried right over there. She raised my sisters and me to have, we had a great education, and also she wanted us to be devout and strict and very active Methodists. We were. In those days, the Methodists were the head of every reform movement. And in fact, the first suffrage national, Women's Suffrage National Convention held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848 was hosted by, you guessed it, the Methodists. So I came to Winona, or my family came to Winona in 1858, a little bit after Winona was founded. Now, there were about 2,000 inhabitants, and there were, well, we found the Methodist Church. That was good. But do you know, there were, for every church, there were 2 students. So we worked tirelessly on our causes. We formed the Minnesota Women's Suffrage Association. And we called ourselves the Suffragists. I was the president. And we worked so hard on getting our voice heard, but our arguments fell on deaf ears. Now go figure. Men, legislators were all men. They were elected by men. And they thought that the women's place was in the home, not in politics. Also, they were afraid that if we got the vote, we'd outlaw alcohol. And so there was another fear they had, and especially a town like Winona, with a very good brewing industry, a big brewing industry, they were very fearful that that would just destroy them. So, but there was another problem brewing in those days, and that's within our association, there was a group, kind of radical militants. They called themselves the Suffragettes. And the Suffragettes were resorted to radical tactics, and they broke away from our organization. But with all these challenges, we still, in 1919, got our full voting rights, and the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, and I was able to vote in 1920 and 1924, the presidential elections. It was a thrill. It was a thrill. So, it was just right before, though, I was laid to my eternal rest in 1926 and returned to the loving embrace of our dear Lord.
I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed someone's embrace. Sure wasn't mine.
What are you doing here, James?
I was down there and needed to stretch my legs. I've been in that grave since 1891, and you ought to know since you put me there, Buttercup.
You put yourself there, and don't call me Buttercup. I suppose I ought to introduce you. This is my husband, my ex-husband, James Thompson.
Nice to meet you. You can call me Jim.
Yeah, no doubt after his best friend, Jim Bean. Glug, 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 glug.
I give it the best years of my life, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. And then, when I'm the sickest I've ever been in my life, gasping in pain for each and every breath that I take, she up and divorces me. It was a deep public humiliation, I'll tell you, and a grave wound, literally. It sent me to my grave soon after that divorce. I was dead. Did she tell you any of that?
You go back down now, James. They don't need to hear any of your laundry, your dirty laundry. These fine folks, they just don't need to hear that.
You know, when I came from Michigan to Minnesota, I brought 2 treasures with me. One was my knowledge of the printing industry, and the second was my new bride, Martha Adams. I was a happy man back then. I had a good paying job with the Republican Herald newspaper, but soon my lungs began to fail me. I had a chronic condition, very painful, horrific pain, and it's called printer's lungs, what it was called. alcohol was the only thing available for me to ease my pain and my suffering.
Well, maybe if you'd had stronger moral fiber and had gone to church more often, you might have not had to seek comfort from a bottle.
Buttercup, you sound just like your mother. Did she tell you about her mother, Fanny Adams? If there's a moral center to the universe, well, Fanny Adams is holding court 7 days a week. And she's telling you what you've done wrong and how through faith and prayer you will be redeemed. Hallelujah. About a year after we arrived in Minnesota, then widowed Fanny Adams arrives on our doorstep with all of her belongings, including a wagon load of moral rectitude, and she moves in with us. For 30 years. I didn't stand a chance.
Oh, she'll hear you. She's right over there. And didn't I tell you not to call me Buttercup?
I gave her that nickname after we'd seen a performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore. Probably the last fun date we ever had. I love the character Little Buttercup in that comic opera. She was a very clever and a very persistent saleswoman, that's for sure. It's sort of like you, Martha, and your dogged pursuit of all those causes of yours. I must admit, I was always so very proud of you, my dear, and your work as a suffragette. Yeah.
James, how many times do I have to tell you? I was a suffragist, not one of those suffragettes.
Whatever you say, dear. Whatever you say.
Has anybody seen anything about the weather? It's kind of cloudy. Do you think it's going to snow or get cold? Have you heard anything?
Oh, sorry, we're being rude. It's just, well, some things happen, and for all your life and beyond, you can't really shake them. My name's Raymond Terrace.
I'm his brother Gerald, his older brother by 2 years. We were raised in Minnesota City. I guess most folks would say that my time on the green side of the sod wasn't all that much different than anybody else's. I was just an average working Joe. I did some maintenance work for some of the businesses downtown. When Japan started the war, why, I went. When it was over, I came back. I had a family. I got married. I had 3 boys and 2 girls. I guess you could say, except for that one day and that one night, I wouldn't have all that much to talk about, and I might not be so worried about the weather. But seeing your dad and your brother die, why, it kind of sticks with you.
I was 15 and Gerald was 17. In them days, about everyone we knew hunted, fished, every chance we'd get. It was Armistice Day, 1940?
That's what they called Veterans Day before the war. Pearl Harbor hadn't happened yet, but the war was very much in the back of everyone's mind. Why, when that holiday weekend started and the weather was more like early September, why, we dressed for the mild weather.
It was going to be a day for duck hunting. Too good to waste. And we did have some good hunting. You could hear shots up and down the river, so you knew there were hunters out, and so was they ducks.
It was about noon. The wind started to pick up a little bit, and it got a little bit colder, but we didn't think anything of it. It was November. What'd you expect? And those ducks, the ducks were coming in low and fast. Then it started to get a little colder, and the wind picked up some more. There was 4 of us. My dad, Ray, and Dad's buddy, Bill Wannicky, and myself. Dad said that maybe we should get going when the wind picked up, but then it really got fierce. I don't remember too much after that. It kind of all blends together. Bill was the first one to die. We were all kind of huddled together in a little group trying to keep warm, and Bill was so cold, and he just kind of went, oh, and he was gone.
We were standing in the river, had a black lab with us. I died next.
My little
Only
brother.
got 15 years on this earth.
My little brother, he was only 15. I knew he was dead because he was so cold. And then I remembered there was the airplane, and I managed to raise my arms, and he saw us. And then my dad died. I was the only one they got off on the government barge. They got me coffee, whiskey, and got me to the hospital. I'd mostly froze my hands and my feet. I was there for a long time. When I went home, it was just me, my mom, and my sister, just the 3 of us. It got down to almost 0. The wind blew the snow into drifts 10, 20 feet deep.
It was unexpected.
They figure more than 20 of us died out there. Froze. Just froze solid.
It was Max Conrad up in that plane of his. How he kept it up in that wind, I'll never know. He must have had God's own help. It's because of him I'm here today. Bill, Ray, and our dad, well, they weren't so lucky. I spent the rest of my life wondering, why me and not them? So folks, you gotta watch the weather. It can change all of a sudden. You've gotta watch it because you never know what's gonna happen.
All right, let's go get some duck hunting on.
Can we go someplace warm?
Yes.
Hi there. My name's Helen Keller. Did I get your attention? Yes. I know. What were my folks thinking? That's what they named me, Helen Marie Keller. Thankfully, I met and fell in love with Fred here, and in 1928, I became Helen Melkins.
And in return, I married one dynamite nightcrawler hunter. She was quick as a cat. She could catch 4 times as many nightcrawlers as I ever could in an hour.
That's true. But let's back up and tell these folks how we even came to be hunting nightcrawlers in the first place.
Sure, all right, so where to begin? Well, my dad and my Uncle John, they ran a bakery, and back in the old days, they used to take a horse-drawn cart house to house to peddle their wares. After a while, my 4 cousins took over the bakery, and so Helen and I, we started a confectionery shop. To be honest, though, I was always more of a river rat myself, and so I started keeping worms in the pop coolers. I put hooks and sinkers in the display cabinets. Well, before too long, I had fishermen knocking on the back door of that sweet shop, so I'd take them down to the basement, and they'd buy their bait.
Finally, someone said to us, why don't you just sell bait for a living?
So that's what we did. Running that sweet shop, it turned sour anyhow. All the little kids snitching peanuts and goodies. I always preferred bait and tackle to Cokes and candies anyhow, so after 18 years, we shut down Capital Confectionery and we opened up Capital Bait Shop, where an old barber and pool hall had been. You gotta remember, before 1947, there was no bait shop in town. So if you're a fisherman, that meant you had to catch your own minnows, you had to hunt your own nightcrawlers, you had to dig your own worms.
And I would dig worms till I was blue in the face. We'd sell 50 worms for a quarter. Can you believe that? It was a deal. When I think of all the nights of Fred and I on our hands and knees in the damp by the lake hunting worms, oh, no wonder Fred got arthritis. He was the first Winonan to sell willow cats. Oh, a deadly walleye bait.
Don't ask where I got them. I'll never tell.
Clearly not going to now, is he? No, my Fred took that secret to the grave with him. Well, after supper, we'd close up shop and we'd go catch our minnows. Close up the shop on 3rd Street and we'd head down on Kansas Street when the water was real high, near the old Botsford lumber yard.
And don't forget about Latch Island.
Latch Island was another great place. We'd get out on the sand and hundreds of bloodthirsty mosquitoes would just eat us up. The things I did for love.
Well, love and money, honey. That bait shop was our source of income for 34 years.
It's true.
It did have a side benefit, though. With all those fishermen coming and going, I always knew where the fish were biting. I think the biggest pike I ever caught must have been this 10-pounder. I was down below Whippendale.
Okay, yes, I have heard many fish tales in my day, but I always preferred breeding and selling parakeets myself. Well, I've heard a lot of whoppers in my day, but you guys better get along before you hear another one yourself. Thanks for stopping by.
Hi there, folks. Thanks for coming out to meet me today. I heard that this is sort of a different walk this year, but it gives more of us a chance to meet you and lets me tell a little bit about some of the fun things I was lucky enough to be a part of in Winona. My name is Ruth Reynolds Lucas. I was Miss Winona in 1938. My sister Martha, she was one of the runners. It was a fun family event. Because of being Miss Winona, I was fortunate enough to lead a group called the Winona Hostesses, or Greeter Girls as we were called. We were trained to greet visitors to Winona. We were supposed to welcome them to Winona by giving them impartial, intelligent information. We were stationed at the Stone Cottage on Homer Road. That's where Highway 61 used to come into Winona, so it was a unique and central location. And it was very cute. I think it is still there. After the highway was moved and
we moved to a different location, the cottage went back to the Zebrecht family. You know, Zebrecht Flowers? I understand it's a law office now. Much fancier than it used to be, but it is still cute. Right close to your middle school. Anyway, we Winona hostess girls got to wear these cute outfits. There were 30 to 40 of us, mostly high school volunteers. I used to salute them, or, well, they used to salute me, like this, when I made their daily inspections. It was so much fun. Oh, yes, I also got crowned Pancake Queen that same year, and we had a pancake eating contest. About 15,000 people crowded into downtown Winona for that, to come watch these guys stuff themselves with pancakes and to listen to the bands. A whole row of pancake chefs, 325 gallons of coffee, 3 barrels of syrup. So much fun. A guy named Eskimo Pete won the contest that year by eating 44 pancakes. And it was his 44th birthday that day too. Well, later I married James Reynolds and we became very active in the community. But unfortunately, Jim died in 1948 of polio, and I lived on his parents' poultry farm for a short time. My daughter Lori was just a little girl, and I was 8 months pregnant with Lindy. They never really knew their real father. Well, after my dear Jim died, I later married Laird Lucas. I'm sure you all recognize that name. He was also a community leader. We spent the rest of our years as active community members. I loved working with the Girl Scouts, the Hospital Auxiliary, Goodfellows, Humane Society, Sequoia, and other organizations. Oh yes, I also loved playing golf and playing bridge too. I'm very pleased to know that my 2 daughters, Lori and Lindia, have come back to Winona and have also become very involved. Do you know them? I think Lori has something to do with the Historical Society that sponsors this event. Have you seen her or Lindia around? Oh, well, it's been lovely to meet all of you and come back and be a Winona greeter girl for just a little while again. So welcome to the quiet part of Winona.
Look, what in the, for Christ's sake, people flying Confederate flags, they got sticking up for the Robert E. blasted copper.
Sam,
When I think of what...
Sam.
Huh?
You're making a spectacle of yourself
Huh?
in front of these people.
Oh.
There they are.
Oh. Sorry, folks. Sometimes I read the news and I get a little carried away. You know, it's, well, that's why they called me Fighting Sam back when I was governor, as you recall. Well, maybe you're a little bit young to recall. I guess it was about 120 years ago when we left. Yeah, Van Zandt's the name. Samuel Rinna Van Zandt and my wife Ruth.
Hi, folks.
Yeah, we came buzzing down here today because we heard there was a party going on, and we left our usual resting place up in St. Paul, where our mortal remains are spending eternity, to see whether we could look up some of our old friends who might be lurking about this side of the sod. And well, it's a good party. Trust it's a dry affair, because I'll have nothing to do with anything
we
that
know.
involves liquor.
Sam lived a life dry. Both his dad and his granddad were Methodist ministers,
Yes, they were.
and well, back in the day, they were just devil on the rum.
They were.
Well, you know, I guess it's lightened up a bit nowadays, they say, but boy, not for Sam. He never took a drink nor said a cuss word, not even when he kicked the bedpost in the middle of the night.
Well, maybe then I did mutter a few things under my breath. You just didn't hear them. But I'm not a goody two-shoes. It's not like I didn't have plenty of opportunity to learn to cuss, learn to drink too. I mean,
Could
well,
have.
you gotta remember, I was just 17 when when I talked Daddy into signing the papers there in '61 to let me join Mr. Lincoln's army and go beat those dad-burn Rebs, and you know, it was, yeah, Company A, 9th Illinois Cavalry. Oh, you betcha. We called ourselves Gearson's Raiders. Chased those gum crackers halfway across Kansas and back, and then you betcha.
They could have taught you how to cuss, I know. But I tell you, you worked right down on the river with all of those dockmen. It's a wonder you didn't turn out like that, because that's where you and your dad spent all your time running your business.
Well, that's true. The waterfront is somewhat a rough place, but, us Van Zandts, we're sort of like ducks, drawn to water. Well, the first Van Zandt on these shores, that was Johannes. He was a shipwright. He landed in Staten Island there in New York. It was back in 1767. He went on to fight with General Washington in the Revolution. And then there was, there was Samuel Van Zandt. That's my grandpappy. Named for him. And he fought the Redcoats in the War of 1812. And then he got. I digress.
Yeah, he does that. Okay, go on.
Well, okay. Well, anyway, got out of the Army and went back to Iowa. And, well, Daddy's business was doing pretty well, and I got the notion, well, maybe I wanted to make something of myself, so I should go to college. So I did. And I discovered real quick that I was better suited for building boats than sitting in a lecture hall and writing term papers. So I tucked tail, went back and went into business with Daddy. Yeah, things went pretty good. In 1868, married Ruthie here.
Well, I don't know whether I'm more flattered or surprised that he remembered that.
Well, there are some things a man learns that it's wise to remember. Well, anyway, about this time the lumber business really started taking off. And back then, best way to get a log to the sawmill or finish lumber to market was you just toss it in the river and float it on down, lash it together in a big old raft. Well, those rafts, they got to be the size, better than the size of a football field. And, steering them around a river bend and keeping them in the channel. Well, that was no mean trick to master.
But you did master that trick. Why, he came up with the idea to take two of the big stern wheel boats, put one behind the raft to push it forward, put another in front of the raft going sideways, so that when he wanted to go left, the front boat went forward. When he wanted to go right, the front boat went backwards. Well, that invention, that turned Winona into a timber boom town. So in 1883, we moved north and became Minnesotans.
Yeah, that was a good move. And you'd think that with all that I had to do with business, that I had plenty to do, but nah, I stuck my nose in politics like a big fool. Started out in the city council, and I think those guys sort of got sick of me, because 1892, Republicans decided I should run for state representative.
And you won.
Well, yeah, I did. I think I must have had a knack for that legislating, because I wasn't up there for more than 3 years, and well, they elected me the Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives. From that high seat, I started thinking that I might like to move into the governor's house. Well, it did take us 4 years of politicking, but there in 1900, I beat old honest John Lind.
Oh, Sam, don't get me wrong. I'm proud of him, and we did get to be governor, but he only won by 2,000 votes. Doesn't hardly give the other man a beating, if you know what I mean.
Oh, be that as it. we still did a good job.
We still did a good job.
Governor, you betcha. We made a lot of changes in state government. We added a game and fish commission. I was the first governor to appoint a woman as a superintendent of state park. That was up in Itasca. And then we made some really serious tax reforms. Yep, we had the first taxes levied on gross earnings of the railroads.
Which earned you no points with Mr. James J. Hill and the railroad tycoons.
Yeah, well, Mr. James J. Hill had some pretty big ideas for his railroad empire. Yeah, you see, back then, if there were two railroads serving the same area of the state, it was by state law prohibited for them to merge, keep competition going. Well, Mr. James J. Hill wanted to have a monopoly so that he could charge folks whatever he doggone well pleased, and they had no choice but to pay it. Well, he got together with Mr. J.P. Morgan of New York City. They put together the Northern Securities Company with an intent to do an end run around our state law. And about that time, they were trying to get Sam out of office. But the people of Minnesota saw through that. Yes.
They elected him again, sent us back up to St. Paul, where we filed suit against him. Won. It got challenged all the way to the Supreme Court, and won that too.
Yep, and now Northern Securities versus the United States of America is known as a landmark Supreme Court decision. It got the antitrust ball rolling for old Teddy Roosevelt and the progressives. And,
it did.
The rest is history.
And the rest is history. Well, we spent 2 terms in the governor's mansion, and then Sam came back and started running his business in Winona. Got really involved helping out all of his fellow soldiers that fought for the North during the Civil War.
Yes, that was with the Grand Army of the Republic. That was a veterans organization. We had chapters in pretty much every village and town in the states of the Union, and the one here was named for a fellow that died in the war, John Ball. He was the surveyor that platted out this whole area. Anyway, I had the privilege of being elected the state commander, and then it was in 1910 I was elected the national commander-in-chief of the Grand Army of the Republic. You know, that was a greater honor than being governor of Minnesota.
I think it was for you, Sam. Well, we had a nice life after retirement until I passed in 1928. Sam kept going, had a stroke in 33, hanged on until a trip on the way to Florida in 1936. He decided to join me instead.
And never made it to Disney World. Well, I guess they say they remembered me as being a crotchety old riverman that beat the railroads. And, you know, I'm really proud we won that one. You know, I'm also really proud we won that
you're my
war.
crotchety old man. Good. Thank you, folks. There we go again. Have a good afternoon.
Hello. I would love to take a group photo, but I guess that's not really possible, what with you in the midst of a pandemic. My name is Harriet Kelly, and this is my big brother Merritt. He was referred to as One Shot Kelly. We were the town photographers a while back, mostly in the 1950s and 60s.
Our family moved to Winona in 1935. I went off to Iowa to learn photography, then served in the U.S. Navy in World War II, where I was a photographer's mate. After the war, I spent some time in Puerto Rico, working for a local newspaper there. Then our parents passed away, and I decided to come back. I didn't want Harriet to be all alone.
We bought a house together.
Well, I made some connections and pretty soon had agreed to work at the Winona Republican Herald.
That was the town newspaper. They changed its name to Winona Daily News in 1954.
That's right. I signed on to work for a year, but ended up staying 26. Back then, we had to work with chemicals in a dark room. And honestly, I liked it in there. Smelly as it was, watching the film slowly produce a picture, and it was mostly in black and white. Color film at the time didn't really produce a crisp shot.
I was, as a photographer too. Sometimes if Merritt had a particularly difficult assignment, I'd help him out. I mostly did the sports photos because Merritt said he didn't know anything about sports. But everyone wanted him. He drove around town in a Volkswagen Beetle and wore an old overcoat, flapping around his legs. Fact is, it was a part of his equipment. He kept the flash bulbs and batteries in the big pockets and a fedora on the top of his head.
You know, I love this hat. I couldn't believe it when men stopped wearing hats. Like, what's gonna stop the snow from freezing you? Or the sun from burning you? I say, if you have a good hat, you'll always be prepared.
And you always had that stinky pipe.
Pipes are not stinky, Harriet. In fact, many people admired the aroma of my tobacco. Of course, these days that really wouldn't be the case.
Pipes have gone the way of the fedora. Not in style.
You folks probably don't even know what a flashbulb is. Now you can fit the whole camera in your pocket. Flashbulbs had to be attached to the camera and only went off when you snapped the shutter. And you could only use it once. One time, I was over at the College of St. Teresa, right? That's where Cotter High School is now. I was over there getting pictures of the new library when a combination of the new synthetic carpet and my wool coat built up static. And pretty soon I had flashbulbs going off in my pockets. They must have thought I was going to go up like a pile of brush.
I told you that I took most of the sports photos, but it was Merritt who was named an honorary member of the Winona State football team.
Which reminds me, one time I was over on the sidelines setting up for my next shot when I got tackled from behind by 5 of those big guys, you know? I never saw it coming, and they had to, Harriet had to take over my job while I was at home propping up my very sprained ankle.
Then there was the roundup.
Oh, it was about 3 in the morning. This is a 24/7 job, you know. Well, 3 a.m. I get called out because some truck overturned on Highway 61. I get to the scene, get a shot of the truck on its side, and suddenly the sheriff is yelling at me. He goes, catch it, catch it. And I look down, and there's a calf running right at me. And I divert the calf back to the sheriff, and the sheriff tackles him. I am no fool. Let the sheriff do the dirty work. But we spent the rest of the night chasing calves that the trucker had been hauling to the slaughterhouse.
Everyone thought that when President Eisenhower came to Rochester and Merritt was sent over to get a photo, that he'd take the chance to get a few shots. Nope, he lined up all the muckety-mucks and took one shot. Perfect one at that.
You know, I loved meeting the people, but mostly people wanted you for group shots. While I like to, you know, pick out my subject, they did want you for like group shots. You know, Chamber of Commerce, school kids, college kids, sports teams, activity clubs. But I did do a really great job of making them all look good too.
Except for that one time when a lady called to complain and threaten because in a photo of about 30 people, her eyes were closed.
I told her next time, just open your eyes. But she called my editor, and the guy promised her that the next photo of her was going to be perfect. But mostly people were great. And when the photos came out in the paper, I'd get all sorts of compliments. Harriet, too.
Then he decided to retire.
Well, by then, Harriet had a gentleman friend.
And you had a lady friend.
Well, I hitched up a trailer to my VW Beetle, packed my camera, my fishing rods, and took off, wandering all over.
I kept up with my photography business for a time. Then I retired too. The technology changed so much, I thought, Harriet, time to go.
Harriet lived to be 89 years old. Beat me by 7 years.
It was those pipes. You shouldn't have smoked.
Harriet, you know us photographers never grow old. We just quit developing.
Oh, Merritt.
Welcome to Potter's Field. As you look up over at this hillside, you'll notice that there aren't very many markers or gravestones. Potter's Field was also known as Pauper's Field, and the people that are buried here were not really the movers and the shakers of Winona. They didn't live in the big mansions downtown. No, those of us that are buried here were buried by the county because we lacked financial funds. Well, my name is Mary Campbell. I was born in 1842 in Steuben County, New York. My father died when I was young, and my mother remarried. So as an older teen, I decided it was time for me to get out on my own. So I left New York, and I came to Winona. Well, I made my living as a servant and as a dressmaker. And I worked several years for a family, Adele and Elsie Porter. They were in, Mr. Porter was in the flour milling business. And I helped with the house, and I helped with the children. I was called a domestic. And there were always at least two servants in their home. And later, he became a wealthy man. And the company is now known as Bay State Milling. Well, I worked with the Porters for several years, and I made a lot of friends here, and I had made my life here. Life was good. And then I got consumption. Lung disease. It can mean anything from pneumonia to tuberculosis. Well, I was sick for a long time. And all my family was out in New Jersey and New York. But I was very fortunate. I had friends who took care of me while I was ill. I died at my friend's home, Mrs. John Ball. And I died in the year 1880. I was only 38 years old then. But unlike most of the people who are buried here, the county buried me here. And unlike most of the people here, I have a gravestone. And that was due to the kindness and the generosity of my former employers, the Porter family. If you look at the number pink 11 and you go to the left, that is my gravestone. Most of the people that are buried here have unmarked graves. They weren't as fortunate as I was. Their lives, their stories of their lives have been lost and forgotten. We were just folks who fell on hard times. Our death certificates read pneumonia, smallpox, malnutrition, the grip, scarlet fever, exposure, accident, consumption. There's a soldier, a young soldier buried up that way. His name was Hollis Sargent. Hollis was part of the Minnesota 4th Regiment, and he fought for the Union Army. He made his way down to Mississippi in the spring of 1862, and shortly after he got there, he became very ill. He was ill off and on, and in and out of the hospital several times over the next 2 years. Probably malaria. Well, the Army finally sent him home in 1864 in the spring. They sent him on a steamboat up the river. And Hollis made it as far as Winona, but he died in Winona. He never made it those last 80 miles home to his wife Phoebe, who was waiting for him in Mower County. He will remain here as a fighting soldier in an unmarked grave. Also, there was a young man who was hit by a car when he was a child, and he was buried here. When his brother was 80 years old, he came here and said, "My brother's buried here." And they found his grave way up there in the woods. And they've been able to now put a gravestone on his grave. People that are buried here, we're not made our lives matter. We were valued, we were loved. People mourned us when we passed away. We had family and friends. We were someone's son, someone's daughter. We had good times. We had bad times. We laughed and we cried. Thank you very much for coming up as far as Potter's Field. I don't often get company. Enjoy your day.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Did you know that masks were required in my day, just like now? I'm going to remove my mask so that I can better share my story with you. There we go. I am Dr. Elizabeth Lynch Schuler, the very first physician to practice in Winona. I was born into a large family near Money Creek in 1884. The journey to being a physician was long, although I hear it took less time in my day than it does now. I graduated from Winona Ladies Seminary. You would know it as the College of St. Teresa. And then I went on to Marquette University School of Medicine in Milwaukee. When I completed my studies there in 1910, I returned to Winona and I joined the practice of my brother, Dr. James Lynch. Together, we treated patients, and I taught health classes at the Winona Hospital. On December 1st, 1917, a truly cold day as I recall, I married Francis Schuler. Francis was involved in his family's business, Schuler Chocolates. They were in business here for 65 years. Francis and I were so much in love, and we really enjoyed living in Winona, as both of our families were here. Our life was just about perfect, but it was not to last. You see, the Spanish flu started in the spring of 1918. We don't know where it originated, but the first reported case was at Fort Riley, Kansas. The spring version of the flu was mild, so Winonans were not alarmed. But the second wave in the fall, was so much worse, and it turned deadly. The symptoms were most severe among young adults, and included bleeding from the eyes, ears, nose, and skin. Little was known about treatments, so many people died of pneumonia. And because the symptoms were so similar to other diseases such as cholera and typhoid, the Spanish flu was often misdiagnosed. The infection rate was about 50%. And it spread around the globe rapidly, especially among soldiers in World War I. The Surgeon General advised communities to close churches and schools, theaters, and other public institutions in an effort to stop the spread of the flu. In early October 1918, the death of a reverend over at St. Mary's College signaled that the flu was indeed in our area. Cases soared and more deaths followed. We local physicians and the city health officer advised of the symptoms and helped people to avoid the disease. The city council debated on whether to put closing restrictions on our schools and churches and businesses, and they were met with heavy resistance, especially among factories who wanted to keep their work going despite losing employees who were ill or who had died. Local ministers pleaded for closure. Laws were passed to forbid spitting on the streets. And eventually, our schools and churches and many factories did close. Many cures were attempted. For instance, drinking large quantities of alcohol, known as flu medicine, was in vogue. But people became ill from over-drinking, and some even landed in jail. This was the time of Prohibition. Nurses often soaked their handkerchiefs in rye whiskey, provided by doctors for medicinal purposes, and then wore them as masks to ward off the disease. Other preventions included rubbing skunk oil. That's right, skunk oil, obtained from frying the fat off of a skunk's back, or goose grease on one's chest at the very first sign of a cough or a cold. Some people consumed large quantities of garlic, and others even poured kerosene over sugar lumps. We physicians were overwhelmed with caring for folks during this time, and I developed the Spanish flu myself. My brother treated me. I was so very ill for many days, and I died of pneumonia on October 18th, 1918. My husband of less than a year was not even able to attend my funeral, as he himself was ill. Thankfully, Francis did recover. You know, I cannot help but reflect on what is happening today with another pandemic hitting Winona and the world. The events are just so similar, with many deaths and disagreements with health authorities on how to stay safe. They say that history repeats itself, but I certainly hope that this pandemic does not last 2 years like the Spanish flu did. I encourage you all to keep washing your hands with warm, soapy water, and do remember to wear your masks. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Take care.
All aboard! It's 4:25 and it's exactly time for me to tell my story. Now,
Hey there, Pop!
oh my, you are gonna frighten me to death.
You're already dead. What am I gonna do? Frighten you to life?
Oh, this is my son, Freddie.
And this is my father, Louis Lou Kitzmans.
And contrary to popular belief, time is important, all right? Our railroads run on time, like I always say.
Time is money.
Yes, time is money. So, I know it is actually worth a lot more than that nowadays. I know all too well. See, time is worth more than any cargo you can carry or any ticket for any journey that you might hope to reach. Anyway, see, I just wasted a whole minute. Why did you let me? I was never good at talking in front of people. I like music. I prefer choirs.
Just like my brother Benny.
Yes, we lost him when he was 15. I had 6 children. Oh, what?
His heart just wasn't born whole, it shattered.
Yes, yes. I had 6 children altogether, and only one of them lived to be an old woman. Pearl. She even got married. But I lost my Flora at 5 and Harry at 19. But it was Freddie here. Freddie was the hardest of all.
I should probably go home.
No, no, no. It's so good to see you, son. Really. See, I was always working for the railroad as a brakeman, and it was my job to jump from car to car. It was really dangerous. You had to slam on the brakes after you jumped on the car. And when I got older, they finally promoted me to passenger conductor, and that's the job I had when I passed away, and I was really proud of it.
Everybody knew my pa. They'd say, "You're Lou Kitzman's son." I rode with him just yesterday.
Yes, and what happened was Freddie here, he did what a lot of boys in those days did. He would get from one end of the town to the other by hopping on the train.
You just had the time to leap to the speed.
Yes, he was playing baseball that day, and
I won that game. I hit a triple. I was so excited.
yeah, and he hopped up and on,
I tripped and fell.
and he lost his footing.
I didn't realize the train was picking up speed.
And it got to be, well, you have to understand, I was riding that train the exact same line every day after that. But it did get to be where I felt like I was just getting to spend some more time with him.
Everyone from all over would tip their hats and say hello to my pa.
Yes, I loved my job. But see, I knew at a very early age that loss was going to be my calling card, because all my life I was that boy who survived the Sioux Uprising of August 1863. See, well, we had a farm out by what you would call Faribault, and one day they attacked and they killed everyone but me, my whole family.
They took him and some other kids into captivity until one day, without any notice, they released him.
Yes, and I never understood to this day. I mean, not why the Sioux attacked. I understand that now. It took me a while, but I realize all the things that were done to them, not by my family, but many others. And no, see, what I can't wrap my brain around is why I got to live to a ripe old age while so many others that I loved perished. Well, the only thing I can think of was, it just wasn't my time.
Speaking of...
Oh yes, you're right. I'm so sorry. I hope that you all will do one thing with the time that you have, and that is use it well.
And now you can tell everybody you knew the great Lou Kitzman and his son Freddie. Gotta go. My friend started a game with that other cemetery. Bye, Pa!
Bye, son. Oh, it was good to see him, wasn't it? Thank you for trusting me to take you on this journey. And like I told all my customers, may wherever you end up be safe and full of good fortune. Bye now.
My name is Lily Slade, Lillian, Mrs. Arthur. And James has stepped away for a time, but I'm more than happy to tell you about my good friend James. My husband Arthur and I were considerably younger than James, but we got to know him in town. Arthur was a druggist and on the city council, and he of course knew James through the business community in town. Then James went to our church, German Presbyterian Church, and we lived just 2 blocks from him. And when James was making out his will, he asked Arthur to serve as his executor. And over the years, we got to know him well. And he told us just a little bit about the things in his life and his early beginnings. You can see his stone. And people have asked me about the stone next to his. And that belonged to a young woman who died when she was about 30. And her name was Augustus Loschenstein. And I believe she was German. What do you think? And she and her sister worked for him. She died at age 30 in 1901. And I believe that James probably paid for her burial in the monument. But James Stovall was born a slave. Decatur, Alabama, 1837. His owner was a man by the name of Major Peter Stovall, English descent. Major Stovall had been a soldier in the War of 1812. Now, it wasn't uncommon for slaves to use their master's last name because their last name, thus Stovall. But Major Stovall wasn't thus James's owner. He was his biological father. Major Stovall was widowed, and his 2 daughters were grown when Peter sired 2 sons by his housemaid, Daphne. Now, Daphne was about 40 years younger than Major Stovall, and I don't think she had any say in the arrangement. James and his brother, John, served as house slaves for their early years, which of course was much better than being field hand. 1857, the Major died, and James belonged then to his half-sister. His half-sisters were his mistresses and owners then. When the Civil War came along, by economic necessity, James was switched from a house slave to a field slave. And as you might imagine, there was not any enviable life. Outdoors, dawn to dusk, hot, hot sun, back-breaking. But James had also heard that this war was being fought with the North to free the slaves. James told us, he said, I got me a taste in my mouth for that freedom. So one day, James said he went to his mistress and asked permission to go to services at the colored church nearby. Now, I use the term colored because that's what they said all James's life. He was colored, or maybe they called him mixed. That's the way it was. But James, he skipped out on church that day. He went to where he'd seen a Union Army camping, Illinois Regiment. And James signed himself up to be a cook in the Union Army. And thus he spent the war as a soldier. His brother John also had enlisted in the Army, and the 2 served. After the war, because of that Illinois connection, I think it was, James moved to Chicago. James, in his 20s, taught himself to read and to write. He opened a restaurant. He owned himself a house. Things were looking good. Until the Chicago fire, 1871, and James lost it all. His brother John, meanwhile, had made his way north and settled here in Winona. John wrote to James and said, James, there's opportunities for you in Winona. Come here. James said, what did I have to lose? So he came. He opened a restaurant here, and James charged 25 cents a meal. Folks said, James, you're never going to make any money that way. But he did. Bought his building, the building next door, and another building on 2nd Street. He became a respectable member of this community. Served on the Board of Trade, served on the grand jury, gave to community causes, and he became active in politics. Now, most of the former slaves, if they were involved in politics, they were involved in the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party. And James, the former slave, was invited to not 1, but 2 presidential inaugurations. He was there for the swearing in of Grant and Rutherford. In his later years, James began to lose his eyesight, and he went blind. He had never married. He had no family in Winona. So the folks from the church and his other friends took care of him, especially the Sheltons. Emma and Virgil were colored as well, Emma was a beautician in town and noted for her wonderful skills, and they helped take care of her. Now, James has been gone since 1990, 100 years ago.
Oh, sweetheart, I can't tell you how happy I am to see you. I wanted to let you know how sorry I was. I died before you finally married Edmund, though. Can't say I was surprised. He was always so sweet on you.
Mother? Yes, I had known Edmund for a number of years. Since 1883, when we all stayed in the same boarding house and he was just a cashier at First National Bank.
But I can't tell you how proud I am of my little girl. Education might not seem that special nowadays, but 100 years ago, oh, it was really special. And look where you ended up, principal of Madison School. That's quite a change from helping me make dresses for the ladies in town.
Maybe we should introduce ourselves. Oh. Hello, my name is Emily Strayer Holbert, and this is my mother.
Nancy Young Strayer, and we just want to say how delighted we are that you're with us today, and we get to tell you a little bit of our story of finding home here in Winona.
Oh, none of us were born here. Father was born in Pennsylvania, you were born in Ohio, and I was born in Illinois, August 1861.
Though Emily never really knew her father. He enlisted in the Union Army in August of 1862 when she was barely a year old. He was a member of the 101st Ohio Infantry as a first sergeant. And then they were sent off right away to Covington, Kentucky to go repel a raid by Kirby Smith.
They marched with federal forces after General Bragg and then on to Tennessee.
Sam, my husband, and his regiment were involved in this costly battle at Stones River. They ended up fighting with bayonets, and they lost over 200 men, killed or wounded.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for you, just waiting for some kind of word. I've been my Edmund, and
well, like most women those days, I rarely knew where your father was or what he was facing. Though I did learn that he and his company were a part of retaking a federal battery in Chickamauga. They had to fight with clubbed muskets.
That must have been where he was taken prisoner.
Yes, the records do say that he died as a prisoner of war. Though his tombstone says he died February 6th of 1863. The records say he died almost a month earlier on January 9th, and then, of course, it took them so long to even let me know. And then there I was, all alone and raising a child by myself, so that's when I came to Winona, because my brother, Henry Young, was living here at the time.
And you raised me on a veteran's widow's pension, making dress spanking to make ends meet, and you built a life for us here in Winona.
Well, I just did the best I could. I never remarried, but I was determined to make a home for the both of us. Emily helped me at first make dresses, and we became quite well known in the social circles here in Winona. But then she went on to pursue advanced education.
Well, you always taught me the importance of education, and I tried to pass it on to my students.
Then, in 1890, my brother, Henry, he became very ill with liver cancer, so he moved in with me, and I took care of him until he died.
Then, a few years later, you too became ill with cancer. January 1896, Mother passed away, and I buried her next to Uncle Henry.
By then, Ed Hulbert had moved on to Chicago, where he was second vice president of a bank. And Ed and Emily must have been keeping in touch all that time, because a year and a half after I died, they were married.
Our wedding at the Humans' house was quite the social event. And then I moved to Chicago, and we made our lives together there. Until 1923, when Edmund died, and I brought him back to Winona to be buried here. A few years later, I moved Mother to be next to Edmund.
But Emily stayed in Chicago until she died at the age of 90.
That was a long time. It was. But I wanted to be here with my family, so I'm here in Woodlawn too.
We certainly saw a lot of changes in the world, from the Civil War to
Chicago in the Roaring 20s.
But Winona. Winona will always be our home. Thank you.